But now new measures to end cold calls for millions of households have come into force. People will now be given the choice to opt in to be contacted by companies offering to sell payment protection insurance or settle personal injury claims. And that means that businesses which contact customers without consent can face fines of up to £500,000. Sky's Laura Bundock has this report.
Did you know houses in your area qualify for free solar panels? That's right, you can have solar panels installed absolutely free.
They are a persistent problem, bombarding us all without our consent. But now companies which hound people with cold calls will face tough new laws. And that's welcome news to many.
These calls are unnecessary and they're irritating. Sometimes you're in a meeting, but I mean also it's your personal information that's also coming up and you want to ask a question as to how come and where they're getting that information from.
A machine, and I cannot answer. To say stop it please, I don't care. PPI, I don't care.
The worst one was when I was actually driving and I got a call, put it through the Bluetooth and it said, "We heard you've been in a car accident."
Little surprise they've been dubbed a blight on our society. Over the last year, 2.7 billion unsolicited calls, texts and emails were made. That's a staggering 50 calls to every single adult in the UK. Which is why new legislation's coming in. It means people will have to opt in to receive such calls, and companies flouting this rule could now be fined up to £500,000.
To some people, they are just a nuisance, but to people who get a lot of them, and particularly older people and vulnerable people, they can be really threatening. And deeply worrying, and I think that's one of the reasons that motivates us to really try to get on top of it. And I think we've done a lot of things to counter them, but this is probably the most powerful measure we've introduced, that and the new fining powers for the Commissioner.
Company bosses will now be personally liable. It's hoped this will stop them restarting new businesses if caught out, and finally end the menace of nuisance calls. Laura Bundock, Sky News.
Well, let's get more on this now, shall we, from David Hickson from the Fair Telecoms campaign. Very good afternoon to you, David.
Hi, Rebecca.
So is this going to make any difference, do you think?
It is a small change. It is long overdue because since 2003, this principle that if you didn't sign up to the telephone preference service, you were effectively consenting to any nuisance call from anybody is still in place. All the government's doing today is to remove that assumed consent in respect of claims management calls, not all calls. So it's a tiny shift in the right direction. What we need to see is some very firm action taken to seriously hit at this problem, not as a data protection issue, but as a matter of business process, with the business regulators stopping this out altogether, totally.
Well, I read that they're putting £500,000 into trading standards so that it can fit, you know, this mechanism to stop these nuisance calls. But it doesn't seem like an awful lot of money when you think
that particular step is the third stage of our three-stage plan that we've put forward to end nuisance calls. Our first step is to say prohibit the practice of cold calling as a way of generating business. Secondly is about service calls, which we can come on to later. The third method is the device which trading standards are issuing to people with dementia and other disabilities is an excellent device that's a very effective way of filtering all of the telephone calls that come into you. That technique should be deployed on all telephone networks, landline and mobile, so that every customer can have the benefit of having their calls filtered. It's a technique developed in a device called TrueCall initially, but can be adapted, not an expensive box to fit to your phone, but as a feature on your telephone network. 2 networks already do it, all of them should. But coming back to the first step, the claims management companies who are being addressed by the measure today are all tightly regulated, and they're going to now come under tighter regulation through the Financial Conduct Authority.
So what kind of impact is this having on people, you know, especially the elderly?
It has a terrible impact. The figures released say that was it 7.2 billion of these calls were made in the last year. The vast majority of those are breaching the regulations that are already in place. So nothing that's been done today will make any difference to that. All that we've done today is more of these calls will become illegal. But the regulators clearly aren't getting on top of them. What we need is the business regulator, the Financial Conduct Authority, to take severe measures against the companies behind this or the companies who profit from it, to simply say telephone cold calling is not an acceptable way of doing business.
And the companies must make a lot of money from it.
They make enough money from it to make them do it. The government thinks that perhaps there is a right under certain circumstances to use cold calling. We disagree with that. We say all cold calling should, wherever there's a regulator able to do it, it should simply be prohibited as a way of doing business. None of this shilly-shally, oh, it's okay if you opt in. None of that nonsense. Cold calling, contacting people on their home phones from a business in an unexpected way, an unwanted way, that must simply be stopped.
But they are going to be targeting the bosses, aren't they? Is that going to make a difference rather than just looking at the companies as a whole?
The regulation about the bosses is again another attempt to try and save something that's failing. A lot of companies that are caught, and they don't catch very many, we're talking about a dozen a year, which is a tiny drop in the ocean in terms of what's actually going on. Where they catch those companies, sometimes what they do is they go into receivership so they don't have to pay the fine. What they're saying is that if a company does go into receivership, they will do their very best to try and recover the money from a company director. We have issues with personal liability for company activities in case of serious accidents and things like that. If they succeed, that's great, but don't anybody kid yourself, this is going to make a dramatic difference. I'd be delighted if it did, but I'm not holding my breath.
OK, David Hickson, we'll have to leave it there. Thank you ever so much for coming in. Appreciate your time.
Thank you.